Um, all right, well, my name is Avery Semple. For those of you who don't know, I mean, Brendan, I don't think we've met in person quite yet, and there's a couple people online that I don't recognize their names. One in. So we are being recorded today. So does anyone not want their image represented? I would tell Sean to try to work around you. Everyone's okay? Cool, great. So for those of you who may have joined us by accident, you don't know where we are. This is the February meeting of New Yorkers for Mental Health Alternatives. And tonight we are really excited to welcome retired Albany Police Chief Brendan Cox, who will be talking in just a few minutes. I just want to give a few announcements first. So if you are in New York, which I know most of the people on this call are actually in New York, in the room. I think we're all in New York now. Our lobby day is coming up on Tuesday, February 27th. So this is going to be, we have 12 tables. We're coming up with a name for a New York medical hospice care professionals for psychedelic assisted therapy group. We have Dark High Refuah, Cluster Busters, a veteran group is potentially going to be there. The Free Temple, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, what is the other drug policy?
Drug Policy Alliance.
Drug Policy Alliance is going to be there.
Maybe.
Oh, maybe. The Psychedelic Society of Western New York. Dr. Bronner's is going to be in representing with chocolates and the soaps again. So those should show up shortly. Pammy, are you Psychedelic Sisterhood?
Not this time around, but I'll be there for NYMHA specifically.
Oh, great. Okay. Do you know if anyone from Brooklyn Psychedelic Society is coming?
I'm not sure. I can check in with Colin.
Cool. Great. Thank you. Dennis, anyone from the western side of the state showing up?
That could be. Didn't you guys have the Western New York Psychedelic Society at a table there last year?
Yeah, but they're okay. More like central.
Okay, yeah, that's true in Rochester.
Yeah.
But so far I don't know of anyone that stated whether or not they're coming.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm heading to California, so
the opposite direction. All right.
Yeah.
Well, the night before our lobby day is really exciting, and I hope that you are all setting time aside if you are coming to the Capital Region to attend the Reconsider Presents Stories of Transformation. So the filmmakers behind the Joe McKay's story, and then Ethan Abend, Sam Wan, and the retired middle school principal whose name Charlie. Their films will be screened, and we're going to have a panel, including the filmmakers and the subjects of the film. So Joe is going to be there talking, and we actually have Paul Stamets is going to dial in at the end to share a message with us. So if you are a mushroom fan, if you don't know who Paul Stamets is, he's one of the most renowned mycologists in the country, and we're really excited that he'll be there. And that's at the Linda at 7 p.m. on February 26th. And I hope you all can make it. And I know Nick, and what was your name again from Assemblymember Rosenthal's office?
Caroline Dunn.
Yeah. So I hope you guys, I know we extended an invitation to Assemblymember Rosenthal.
She is hosting it.
Oh, she is hosting it.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. So I hope you guys can come as well. It's going to be a great evening.
I think we have two hosts that are lawmakers, unless I'm missing anybody. Jake Ashby said he would do it, and Linda was.
Oh, fantastic. And I know Pat Burke also said that he's going to be there.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. We need to circle back and figure out if he's also.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're sponsoring. Yeah. Great. Let's see. So that. And then tomorrow, there's a webinar, and I will send it in the chat when Brendan comes up here. I'll try not to distract too much. But there's a webinar that Senator Fernandez and Assemblymember Burke are hosting at the Capitol in the Legislative Office Building. But it's going to be available via Zoom. So people can dial in and take a listen to what they're saying about the bills that they're reintroducing this year as well.
Are you gonna be there?
I am going to be there in person. Yeah. And yeah, Taylor, I know, is not on the call, but she and I have been talking about creating some more graphics for the lobby day. And our website is back online. So if you have been waiting with bated breath to go to NYMHA.com, and it's your usual weekly routine is to check our website, you can now do that again. And I want to create a new page that has all the media that we've been generating and the meetings that we've had that we've recorded. So people, I know it's on our YouTube channel, the NYPAC YouTube channel, but I would love to have that all in one place. So I'm going to work with Taylor to get all that together. And yeah, so I think that's all of the things that I wanted to announce before welcoming Brendan to talk, and the other stuff I can go over afterwards. Okay, so Brendan is here in person. He is representing Law Enforcement Action Partnership, which formerly, and what I knew as, was against prohibition. And so I'm really excited to hear him talk about, from a law enforcement perspective, how we have been failing in the drug war. I'm assuming that's what you're going to talk about, and how we can do better by creating a different system moving forward.
Can I ask a question about taping this?
Sure.
Because the audio will be caught there, reconsider as taping, but are we gonna have a way for people in the future to see Brendan's presentations here in person?
Yes, so this is recorded.
Okay, but you won't see him.
I can move this.
That's what I was
Okay.
thinking.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Brendan, without further ado, why don't you come on up? Thank you so much for being here.
Appreciate it.
Let's see.
How's everybody doing?
Good.
Sure.
Hello, everybody.
How's that?
So it's great to be here. I'm glad the snow held up. I figured we could cancel it. I want to really thank New Yorkers for mental health alternatives for inviting me tonight. Great, thank you for reaching out. So a little bit of my background. So my full-time job is the Director of Policing Strategies for the LEAD Support Bureau. And LEAD is Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. And basically LEAD exists to take folks that are caught up in the criminal legal system based on unmet mental health issues, unmet substance use disorders, extreme poverty, and remove them from the criminal legal system and into a long-term system of care based on a harm reduction platform. So having police officers not arrest people who ultimately have substance use disorders, mental health issues that might be committing crimes, and instead of arresting them, diverting them to a case manager, it really starts working with that person from a person-centered approach to try to figure out what it is that person's ready to address. And we really have a non-abstinence approach, so we recognize that people are going to use substances, and we're going to meet them where they're at, and we're going to work with them wherever they are. Started in Seattle in 2011, and it's been expanded to about 85 jurisdictions across the country, including in Albany, Waterbury, Cohoes, and a number of other places now in New York as well, but locally those are the places that exist. I'm also a board member of Law Enforcement Action Partnership. I'm actually the board chair now. We are a group of law enforcement professionals, both current and former, that you said formerly known as Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, who believe the war on drugs is unjust and needs to be changed, and that prohibition has led to a whole bunch of problems in our community and problems that truthfully have created really barriers between community and the police that have really broken down public safety. Now we can actually deal with all kinds of substances in a public health approach rather than a criminal legal system approach. We also believe in a whole lot of other reforms. That's why one of the reasons why we expanded our name to Law Enforcement Action Partnership. And that's part of our mission is to look at really community reforms with the police and how we can do better in the criminal legal system. And I'm retired from the Albany Police Department. I retired back in 2017. I was lucky enough to be chief there when I left, and I still live with it. So it's great to be here tonight. So the view on psychedelics from a criminal legal system player's view, from an ex-police officer's view, is really scoped out by the war on drugs. And it's really scoped out by how we have traditionally looked at all illicit substances. And even though psychedelics, for the most part, played a very small role in enforcement in my time in the police, it usually only came into play when the dead or fish came to town and everybody was worried about folks camping out and issues that might surround that. Those were really the only times that came about. But because of the war on drugs and because of this moral legal view that we have on illicit substances that are only illicit because we have lawmakers that have said they're illegal because of a moral view, not because of a scientific view, but because that's been kind of pounded into our heads. And because since 1970, we've said, hey, we're going to do the supply and demand strategy to try to address substances through the criminal legal system. For police, we look at anything that's looked at as illegal and just think, hey, that's bad. Like, we need to do something about that. And in essence, we spend about $47 billion a year as a nation trying to prohibit drugs through the criminal legal system. We arrest a lot of people, we harm a lot of lives, and we tear a lot of communities apart, plain and simple. And that's not just the police, that's the entire system. And of course, that's includes the lawmakers, the people that make the laws and say, hey, we need to prohibit this, and we need to arrest people and somehow punish and coerce people out of what we think is a problem. Yet we kind of know that only 10% of people that ever use substances, well, kind of know, we know this, only 10% of people who ever use a substance wind up with problematic use. The majority of people use a substance and never wind up developing problematic use. They either stop using totally, or they use in a way that's not problematic. Like they use at home, or they drink in a bar, because of course, alcohol, it's a more dangerous substance, certainly than psychedelics, but pretty much than any other illicit drug that we've known, probably up until fentanyl hit the streets. Fentanyl, you can make the argument, hit the streets because we've had the supply strategy to go after drugs and go after cartels, and it became cheaper to produce a synthetic drug than it did to have heroin continue to come. So you think about how we've driven through criminalization, we've actually created an overdose situation where we have over 110,000 people die a year. But psychedelics, to get back to psychedelics and plants, like those are usually not on the forefront of law enforcement, but they fall into that lumped category of, hey, here's these scheduled drugs that are dangerous and that we need to keep out of the hands of them. And in truthfulness, what we've learned through a lot of research, and of course that research has been stunted based on the scheduling of drugs and Schedule 1 not even being allowed to really be researched, is that psychedelics and plants can be used to help an awful lot of people out. When we think about trauma and PTSD, and we think about what we know now through psilocybin, through MDMA, through ketamine. I'm not going to try to pronounce a lot of the other names because I always get them wrong. But at the end of the day, we know that a lot of those things can help people out. And if I think about the community that I used to serve in Albany, I think a lot of trauma that the community has gone through violence, and I think that my community could utilize that. But on top of that, a kind of unforgotten piece, and some of the stuff we've done with Reconsider and some of the things we do through LEAP, is also our officer wellness and well-being and health. The simple fact of the matter is that police and first responders, but especially police, they see a lot of trauma that they respond to every day, and they wind up in traumatic incidents every day. And traditionally, our response to that has not been very good, because we kind of say to our police, hey, you signed up for this job, you knew what you were getting in for, suck it up and go on to the next call. I had an attorney once tell me that as chief, that that's what we should be telling our officers through PTSD. And I kind of walked through my own career. I gave some examples and said, oh, so we're not supposed to go ahead and deal with this separately if somebody's done A, B, C, and D. And that attorney tried to say to me, well, you know, you signed your name on the dotted line. I said, well, I didn't sign my name on the dotted line thinking I was going to see all of these things. And of course, because we kind of leave police out there many times with not a lot of help and a lot of stigma, they turn to other things like alcohol. So like in my career, I became an officer in 1994, and I worked the 4 p.m. to midnight shift. The traditional way for us to deal with all of our stress was, hey, we're going to go out to a bar. And of course, we live in New York where bars are up till 4 in the morning. Truthfully, for most of us cops, they were usually open until 6 or 7 in the morning or whatever time we wanted it to be open. We drank all night. And that, of course, led to bad things at home, bad things with our families. Thankfully, I was young at that time and I was just getting married and I had a wife who was understanding. So she stuck with me. But at the end of the day, we don't give a lot of resources for our police to ultimately deal with. When I came up through the police administration, I became the primary contact for our employee assistance program and our union. And I can tell you over and over again that there were police officers that were involved in critical incidents, really, really good police officers, the type of police officers that we want serving our community, that wind up because of their trauma having PTSD. And all we really had for them was talk therapy. Send them to a psychiatrist, have them talk to that psychiatrist, and see if we can ever regain this person back to the police force. Or more importantly, gain them back to the sense of humanity that they needed. At the end of the day, that resource wasn't enough. And far too often, we were saying, hey, we have to sever ties with this person because they can never make it back to where they are. If we think about where we are in public safety right now, you hear every day about hiring and retention. And you hear that in a lot of things. You certainly hear that in policing. And we need to make sure we can take care of our officers as best we can. We also know that there's a ton of scrutiny, as there should be, in the way communities are policed. And the fact that, especially communities of color, have policing and feel over-policed, that sometimes becomes aggressive, sometimes becomes traumatic itself. If we don't take care of the police that are out there ultimately serving the community, and we don't provide access to things like psychedelics, then ultimately we're just continuing to set ourselves up to fail, and we're actually not serving the community in the way we need to. So I kind of came across the whole psychedelic thing in kind of a backward way. Because for me, when I first came across the idea and the recognition that we had to stop arresting people for substance use disorders and mental health issues and poverty, and those being the drivers of crime, I wasn't thinking of psychedelics. Like the issue really for us was crack cocaine, was heroin, was opiates. Psychedelics weren't part of the issue. But as I started to get educated by other people, folks in this room, by folks that we consider, by folks at LEAP, it also became apparent that we were missing this component for the mental health and well-being of our community, for the mental health and well-being of our officers and our first responders. And I've seen some of the stories you're talking about the panel. I can't wait to see that happen. By the way, for folks that have not been to Melinda, that is a great place. It's a great setting. So that's an awesome place for you guys to be able to have that panel. But I've heard those stories. And I know that those officers, teacher, other first responders, they have actually stepped outside of their comfort zone, said, I'm going to do something that might actually get me in trouble. And they've sought out psychedelic therapy on their own. And they are now in a much better place in their lives. And they're able to tell their stories. And they're able to say, hey, I'm willing to step up and tell that story and let other people know. So if we're not going to listen to the researchers, we should be listening to those folks with firsthand experience that have been through this. But at the end of the day, like, we have to stop the criminalization of substances. I know, when we look in the news these days, we see Oregon and we see they've decriminalized all drugs, and we've seen the pushback, right? In my opinion, decriminalization is a step, but part of the issue with that, of course, is that that does not allow for a safe supply. So one of the things that I at least look at, while I want this public health approach, to me, I want, and I know there's some folks who don't want any regulation, and I understand that as well, but I would love to see us have an actually regulated market where folks know where they can go get the safest supply that there is. And let's face it, they're of course dangerous to everything we do. And one of the things that I get asked often, especially in the everyday work I do through LEAD, people will ask me all the time, well, like, what is the message to our kids? Well, we're not kids anymore, 27 and 23. But at the end of the day, like when I talk to my sons about this, they've heard me talk about legalizing substances for a long time. And that didn't mean to them, like, go do whatever they want. It meant, hey, be smart, recognize what you're doing, and listen to people. And of course, we have scientists and researchers that have told us, pointing to mushrooms behind me like they're psychedelics, and of course they're not, but have told us that there are psychedelic mushrooms and other substances that are safer. We know that. So let's actually listen to them. Let's actually do it. So I'll kind of just stop there, open things up if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, my first question is, what are you doing on the 27th? Can anyone from leave occupy a table?
So my intention is to try to join you.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's my intention.
Yeah,
It is on my calendar tentatively. My intention is to try to join.
Great, great.
It is so great to listen to you and saying what you've been saying, and I think what probably everybody in this room believes to be true. Psychedelics should never been illegalized. And they can help so many people. How do we get this done? That's the big question.
It's a huge question. And I think the challenge is that, and it's great to see that folks from downtown Albany are on. I think we need to do it both from the state level, but we also need to continue to push the federal government. Because as long as the federal government continues to schedule psychedelics, for that matter, where they are doing cannabis as a Schedule I drug, or even when cannabis hopefully gets to Schedule III drug, there's still a huge challenge for many folks to be able to gain access. So for those in law enforcement, cannabis is legal here in New York. It's not legal for police to be able to use and keep their job, even though we know cannabis has medical benefits and is way less dangerous than alcohol, which is typically the abused substance for police.
Even off duty.
Even off duty, because of the fact that federal funds come to police agencies. So police agencies locally aren't willing to say, hey, we're willing to grant access to our officers to use cannabis, just like they will probably not likely be if it's only at a state level for psychedelics, because of the fact that they're worried that the federal government will turn around and say, well, we're going to take their funding away. They're in the state of New Jersey, the New Jersey State Police and the regulations have turned around and said, well, we're not going to test or fire officers for using cannabis. But that still hasn't given like a green light for everybody to just do what they do. But here in New York, when cannabis was going to be legalized, it was clear that everyone said, well, we still can't allow police to utilize cannabis, even though, again, it's far less dangerous, has benefits to it. And I'm going to imagine the same thing will happen. So it's a complicated issue, and we need to continue to push, not just at the state level, but we do need to continue to push at the federal level. And when it comes to scheduling, there's a lot of different arguments. A lot of people would say, myself included, that we ultimately need to deschedule and have the same carve-outs that we have for alcohol and for tobacco.
Have you heard that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Dan Crenshaw have gotten the military budget for active duty? Yeah, that's really, that's exciting and hopeful news.
I agree. And I think that can help pave the way for many things, because that is obviously a huge issue for veterans, and to be able to have that issue resolved at a federal level, I think that will help us to be able to do that. But I think it's still a huge challenge, because there's still many people that do not want to.
But and specifically in light of psychedelics, though, with the neural plasticity that it encourages and the ability to then process trauma, I mean, as a substance for first responders, police, firefighters, EMTs, I mean, that can save lives. I mean, that's really one of the reasons that I'm doing what I'm doing, is to make sure that the people that are putting their lives on the line for our communities get the support that they need.
Absolutely.
I have two questions, very different. The first was whether you would be comfortable sharing what the turning point was for you in your law enforcement career that got you to think maybe this harm reduction thing could work for us. And then the other question is more specific about a model of legalization here in New York. So maybe I think about how to ask you the second question while you answer the first.
Sure. So I think my journey became, when I was a brand new police officer, I wanted to do narcotics. Straight up. That was where I thought I wanted to be. I wanted to chase people down, throw handcuffs on people, and I wanted to have something. And I saw very, very quickly that the world of drug enforcement, the world of the war on drugs, was not black and white. It was not what I wanted, and it was not. I did not want to have a complete adversarial relationship with everybody. I then wound up becoming a detective supervisor in our juvenile unit, overseeing crimes committed by and against juveniles, overseeing the domestic violence unit, overseeing elder abuse, and especially overseeing juvenile-related crime. Started seeing things like adverse childhood experiences and some of the actual root drivers of public disorder and crime. And I wanted to have a different approach than just enforcement. But we didn't have a different approach at that time. I then at one point became introduced to the folks that were running the syringe exchange program, or ultimately proposing a syringe exchange program in Albany. I was on the NYMHA board, and they gave a presentation. And I was the only one from law enforcement there, and they keyed in on me because they were not having any luck getting any meetings with police and or city government. So they asked me to sit down and talk. So we sat down and talked. I knew nothing about syringe exchange, and at the time, it took me a while to understand that syringe exchange was part of harm reduction. I didn't even know what that term was at that moment. But it just made me realize that, okay, here's this approach that looks at people as human beings and recognizes that we can actually keep people way safer. And for me, the buy-in for the syringe exchange was the fact that we could reduce needle sticks for officers, because I saw too many. I thankfully never got stuck, but I know too many other officers that did get stuck and wound up having to go through all the medical procedures they had to go through to deal with that needle stick. So that brought me in, and when I saw those syringe the needle sticks get reduced when the needle exchange started, I was like, this makes sense. And then I was kind of the community person from the command staff, and I went to too many community meetings where I also heard from the community how that adversarial relationship was not a good one. People didn't always like us, and I got into this policing business because I wanted to be the good guy, not the bad guy. But I felt in those meetings like the bad guy. And when I realized that, especially when we arrested people for substance use, that they weren't just getting punished when they got arrested and might have gotten incarcerated, but they were also getting punished by the fact that they couldn't get public housing. Their families would get evicted from that public housing if, God forbid, they ever moved back in. I couldn't imagine if I moved back in with my parents when I was 20 years old because I got arrested at 16. Because remember, at the time when I was doing this, 16 years old in New York was an adult. I don't know how that ever could be. But at the end of the day, you know, my whole family could get evicted because they let their 20-year-old son move back in with them. Education, employment, all of those things. We just continue to punch people. So it became clear to me that we needed to do something different. And then the more and more I talked to people in the harm reduction community, and the more and more I spoke to case managers who agreed, and I realized that we can't, because it's one thing about not arresting people, but then there's the thought of like, well, we should just force people to go to treatment. And then the recognition of like, well, wait a second, why are people using substances? And why are people winding up with problematic substance use? And okay, I can send somebody to 30 days worth of treatment and they can get no help because no underlying issues. Nobody's getting to my underlying issues in 30 days. I'm not getting to my underlying issues in 30 years, let alone 30 days. So we're just turning people back out with no true support. They're going right back to the same place they were, not meeting their needs. So that was kind of the journey of me realizing that those are different ways.
So the question about the legalization of psychedelics in New York. Some people, some lawmakers think that we need to go the route of cannabis legalization. Lawmakers did it, let's follow the same path. Other people say it's been an abject disaster. You go to New York City, there's a bodega on every street. Kids are buying stuff that they don't even know. What do you think? Do you think that, you know, I'm struggling because there are a bunch of different models for this, but one of the models that we've been thinking about, just theoretically thinking about, is providing people with a user's license. You know, they take the course, they learn about psychedelics, then they are able to possess psilocybin and other psychedelics legally.
Recreationally, medically, both.
Anything.
Yeah,
If
it's
they get-
about education,
It's
so
about
that people
education.
know.
It's about empowering people with knowledge about what it is. Because now you can go to, you know, a shop that sells mushrooms and chocolate and you have no idea, or you can buy it in the underground market. Do you think that something like that, which is a radically different model, would work in New York?
So I think it could. To me, I would like to almost see multiple levels. Like I think that's a great idea. I also like the idea of a store that's regulated, that somebody who doesn't have that license can go in and buy like they would normally buy alcohol. I agree that, you know, I understand people's desire to go like, let's go to cannabis. It has been a disaster. I sat on one of the working groups before it was legalized, and unfortunately, that working group, the recommendations to legalize, while a lot of those were followed, we also then legalized, and we've gone, what, 2 years and barely any stores have opened. I'm not saying communities shouldn't have a
Legal
choice.
stores.
Legal stores, right. No, there's plenty of illicit stores that are operating that, and I look at that and say, well, I don't want police also raiding those stores either, because it's like, now we're just continuing the war on drugs. That all being said, like, I do like the idea of a store, a legal store, that you can go into, that you actually know it about, if you're uneducated. So I kind of like a combination of exactly what you proposed and having those regulated stores. And then, of course, for the medical part, like making sure we have, I look at cannabis from a medical position. I went to a doctor's appointment with my father once, and he's got a whole host of medical issues I won't go into. But at the end of the day, I said to his physician, I said, you know, what about cannabis? And he's just like, I don't believe in that. I'm like, okay, but you believe in giving them an opiate. Could we talk about something different? So I also think we need to do something to make sure we're educating our physicians so they're not just.
I just want to chime in from that. I'm curious what your standpoint would be on age in regard to the therapeutic. People under the age of 18 experience trauma,
Yeah.
and they need to be met where they're at in regards to negotiating those existential conditions and realizing a horizon of wellness for themselves. And so I'm just curious where you stand in regard to age, because like the store model, like going in to buy alcohol.
Right.
We don't necessarily think that that's ratcheting up one's
Yeah.
horizon of wellness
Right.
in dealing with trauma. It's more of suppression. So I'm just curious.
Yeah. And I think that's why we need kind of multiple layers, because as far as I'm concerned, if a physician and parental parents, guardians are sitting down with that youth and with the doctor and saying like, this is the right course of action, that's perfectly fine with me. I would agree that I don't want somebody under, whether it should be 18 or 21, I don't know. The truth, I have to say, like from an alcohol standpoint, we used to have more problems from our college students in Albany because all the bars were closed or finally tightened things up and didn't allow anybody under 21 in. That caused more neighborhood problems than having 18, 19-year-olds in bars. I'm not old enough to have lived under the 18, 19-year-old regulations. My older sisters did. So I remember those times. And to me, having a place that's established that actually help regulate some of those things can actually help out. But I do think there has to be kind of a multiple level. To me, a physician, that's at that decision level, not at someone else's decision.
I appreciate that nuanced response. Thank you.
What do you think? I'm one premise this first. I'm 65, so I grew up at a time where everybody smoked pot, and in high school, when I grew in the graduating class in 1976, I would say well over half of the population in high school, the jocks, the cheerleaders, everybody was smoking pot. It was also the time of Rockefeller's drug laws. So the police, it was a really adversarial relationship with the police, especially for those of us who were long hairs and wore our freak flags on it. But for and just in general, it was a very them and us kind of a situation. I still when I hear a siren and I'm still looking behind me, and then it's just instinct. And I think probably at that time there were a lot less open-minded policemen. At this point, probably a lot of the cops, at least in high school, were pot smokers. And I wonder how much the sort of the average officer, how much there is open-mindedness towards hallucinogens in a positive way, towards how they feel about the fact that weed is decriminalized now. I mean, what is, obviously everybody's different and it's hard to generalize about how all police feel, but what is your sense of sort of the way that adversarial them and us, especially when it comes to like the marijuana and hallucinogens that have been type 1 narcotics for the longest time, which is absurd.
So I think thankfully, there's a lot more that are open-minded and believe that cannabis should be legalized, psychedelics should be legalized, and that we should stop this adversarial relationships. I think there's not everybody, and I think that unfortunately there are still some hardline people that are like, no, we need to keep all substances legal. I can tell you that since I've been doing the work I've been doing it for 7 years. But even when I was an active officer, active chief, I was having a lot of these same discussions. And back then, I'd go into a room full of police officers and we'd be like, we can't legalize this stuff. And now police officers are like, yeah, we just need to legalize this. So I think a lot of them realize that. And to your point, we are all human beings. We were all youth. We were all kids. We all did a lot of things. So there's plenty of times that I have that conversation with somebody that's like, we can't have this substance be legal. And I say, well, what did you do when you were 18 years old? It's like, well, that's different. Well, no, it's not different. Stop.
So one of the, sorry, Dave, but one of the, John McDonald came to the city of Troy's council meeting where we proposed a referendum to decriminalize just within the city. And he had done a search of the arrest records for the city of Troy over the last 5 years, and there were 0 with psilocybin. So it may not be on the books that it's decriminalized, but there are no arrests. So, I mean, I think that attitude is shifting, but it's just a matter of like making it formal.
And I also think though, one of the things we need to look at is the equity piece, right? Because I agree with you, there are no arrests. And that's why I said, the only time we were making arrests for any psychedelics was truly when the dead or fish were coming. And even that was a long time ago, when either this version of the dead or fish come to town now, it's actually not the same atmosphere. But
Free for all.
yeah, well, it used to be. Now it's different. It's almost like a different generation. But that being said, like there's also this equity piece, and I think we need to keep this in mind. I believe we do need to legalize psychedelics, but we also then need to take a look at those drugs that are negatively impacted, the communities where a lot of enforcement on the war on drugs is taking place, communities of color, and realize that there's still a huge disparate impact there. And we need to address that as well. And I think that's like some advocates that I speak to, they will say like, well, we don't want to talk about psychedelics. And the reason why they don't is because they see the negative impacts on poor communities, on communities of color from other drugs. So they're like, well, there's a whole bunch of people saying legalize psychedelics. Well, our communities are still suffering. So I think we need to make sure that we are recognizing that, yes, this is a very specific issue, but at the same time, there's a larger issue that we need to make sure that's addressed so we have that.
There's another part of that equity argument, and you'll remember this, is when John McDonald talked about that, we also acknowledged that while there are no arrests, that basically means that people that feel like they can violate the law and not get caught by the cops have access to psychedelic drugs.
Right.
People who are afraid of getting caught by the cops, who traditionally have been over policed, or who aren't comfortable with an underground market, don't have access to psychedelics. So for example, that same week, I think a guy came into the shop here and asked for psychedelics because his dad was dying. And he had read the research, but he couldn't figure out where to get it. That kind of guy is not, his dad's 80 years old. He's not going to go get it in the underground market. So legalizing opens up, the possibility for people who don't want to violate the law, and just chance that they're not going to get arrested to have access. So.
Yeah, before we ask any more questions in the room, does anyone online have any comments, questions, concerns? Okay, great.
If I've understood you correctly, you said that you thought the education and all that was good, but there should also sort of be a store, and not necessarily the same business model as the way they're dealing with cannabis, but a store where somebody can come in and just buy, over the counter legal psychedelics. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's ironic that I find myself saying there's got to be some education involved here. It's not the same as just going into a store and buying a couple of joints.
Yeah.
You're not going to freak out on a couple of joints. Hallucinogens are much more potent, and I think that people should understand that this is just something recreational. They can pop 2 grams of psilocybin and go about their business, because it's not, this can really, if you don't know what's going to happen, you can be really freaked out just because it's so completely unexpected. So there needs to be some degree of education involved in that, in the selling of it, in order to do it responsibly, I think.
Kind of like getting a scuba license before going scuba diving.
Yeah.
And
Well, so- and
that's
that-
one thing, but.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we've been tossing around, is that having that education component, but having it in a store and making sure that it's tested and safe is a huge component of that. Because if we don't have a labeled packaged thing, then I had an interview the other day, and there's over 250 different mushrooms that contain some type of psychotropic, psilocybin, bactusin, muscimol. It's like, but some you need to take handfuls to have a slight effect, and some, if you take one, you're floored for hours. So that's where having that legal market and being like, oh, this is a, you're not doing anything for a few hours mushroom, and this is you can go to the museum and still have a good time kind of thing. But I do think that education component of like understanding what you're getting yourself into when you take a mind medicine like that is important.
Yeah, and I don't know how, I mean, what form that would take, a class that
And
everybody
it might
has to
too be
take.
the
in
person
order-
who's working, the person who's working that calendar should also have that.
Oh.
Be able to say,
Sure. yeah,
here's what
sure.
you're about to buy, here's
Yeah.
how you're supposed to use it, here's all the cautions around.
But the
Preferably-
person buying it, you're ultimately being responsible for the wrong that thing to happen, right? Because the person selling it can say, no, you can't have this. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, if you look at the way that the alcohol beverage laws operate in New York, when I'm a bartender in the past, I was responsible to not overserve somebody. I was responsible to make sure somebody was of age. So to me, one of the reasons for a regulated market is to also not, I agree that when somebody takes a substance, they're ultimately responsible for taking that substance.
Yeah.
However, I think that you can have, well, under certain circumstances, you should be able to say, like, I'm not gonna sell this to this person because of C. And, in a bar, it would be, this person is far too intoxicated.
Yeah, but the person that walks into your bar could be on some medication with no idea. On something
Sure.
else that, you can't see, you can't detect, you sell them a drink and you drop dead. So we can't really place the responsibility on the person selling it or decision making to say, no, you can't have it. Because we don't have all the information about the person trying to buy it.
So I agree, but we already do that to a certain extent with people who serve alcohol. We already say if this person exhibits certain behavior, I agree they're not gonna do everything. But if a person exhibits certain behavior, we're not supposed to serve that person. I mean, there is no perfect, I mean, we're talking about substances that are mind altering, so there is no perfect. There's certainly not a perfect solution to it, making sure people have access to something. But I think there are safeguards you can put in place to at least make it as safe as possible. I don't have all
The
the.
problem I see is that if someone goes into a store and doesn't follow the medical history that's pertinent, that kill them if they take this something else with medications and wrong, for example. That's where I see a problem.
That's why the user's license is so interesting, because then you provide people with the information that they need before they have the legal ability to buy something.
Yeah, maybe. Less of some going to the store. I think it's a good idea.
Do you think law enforcement who would be taking advantage of psychedelics as therapy for trauma-centered care would have to be sort of going through a different therapeutic channel than that of your ordinary sort of patient for these mind medicines, in the sense of, their role in regard to, say, civil servant, protecting, serving, and then just simply monitoring their progress and trauma? You see it as, almost having a clinical wing within the law enforcement branch of providing care for their officers, rather than taking the DIY route. Even though, everyone can, get the license, but whether or not they're really following through with healing is a different question.
So yes, I would prefer to see that more of a clinical model for police, unless we're talking about completely unregulating everything and saying you should just have access. That there makes sense when it comes to trauma at home for police officers or for anybody else in the criminal system, for that matter, actors, to be able to have that. So like for myself, just an example, if somebody was out on job-related stress, there were certain steps they would take. If this was an option, I would expect that physician, somebody along those lines would say, this is something we believe that actually benefits this person. And that's why I say this is such a layered issue. It's not a simple process. Because there are ramifications, and you do want to make sure obviously the person's doing better. There's a way different scenario for just somebody who's looking to use something for recreational purposes. Something that's coming down to this person, this is an option, but this person, It's a full human being. It's a full police officer.
We're probably a solitary voice for a while. Where do things stand now? Does, like, what percentage of law enforcement that you deal with actually ascribes to these things?
I think it's a mix. I think it's still a mix because in my work under LEAP, under Law Enforcement Action Partnership, I'm dealing with a lot of like-minded people. Reconsider, we had a couple-day event that we retreat. We had a retreat. We had a lot of first responders, a lot of different law enforcement that were there. I still deal with a lot of first-line personnel and a lot of chiefs across the country that still aren't here. So I would say it's.
And in our area, like where does Albany and Troy?
I think Albany and Troy in this region has been pretty progressive. We were progressive when it came to stop arresting people under LEAP. We were the third city in the country that.
Out of curiosity, on the age spectrum, what do you find that that there's more sort of staunchly opposed officers in the older demographic or in the younger demographic? How does that tend to play out?
I would say a lot of the younger officers now, this newer generation, has already come in with a different. I think for the older officers, it's taken us some time.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Sheriff Russo on the phone, and he was very open to it, but he was just his concern was, well, people shouldn't be driving on it. Of course, it would
driving issue.
Driving while impaired will never go away because you shouldn't do that. Self-driving cars. I'm not really an advocate, but I guess that would work in those situations. But he was very open to it, and I think I haven't spent too much time with him in person, but he is of the older generation, and yeah. So there are people whose minds have opened to the possibility of access.
The driving issue always comes up. Right. Psychedelics, it certainly comes up with cannabis. And at the end of the day, you think about the job that's been done, not just by law enforcement, but across the board when it comes to driving influence of alcohol, those rates are way, way down. Think about you're a kid. Nobody thought twice about it, right? And at the end of the day, these days, people do. And it's not just because people are worried about getting arrested, it's because we've done a really good job educating people about being impaired, of the dangers and the risk to yourself and to others around you. No, that's not what you do, especially today when you have access to Uber and Lyft.
For those officers that would give you a harder time or more opposed, I'm curious what their main motivations are. In on this the driving point, they not believe the substances are beneficial, or is it more?
I think they fall in line with many other people in this country that still have this moral dilemma about whether or not, one, is the substance actually good for you, and two, we've all been told for so long that these substances, anything that's listed as illegal, is bad, and that you're gonna, there's some moral dilemma. So I think a lot of times it's getting past that. That's just having a real conversation about, okay, what's your life circumstances, what's your experiences, what have you seen? And it's also recognizing that, police many times see the worst of the worst. So like when I tell police that only 10% of people are problematic substance use, there's a lot of police that are like, there's a lot of police that are like, there's no way. Like, okay, I understand you saying there's no way it's only 10% of people, but that's because you're dealing with the 10%. You're not dealing with the person that's sitting at home. You're not dealing with me if I go home and drink half a bottle of Jameson. Right?
If I drink half a bottle of Jameson,
absolutely. But if I do that, like I try to keep it sometimes with alcohol, just because I'm like, that's legal. If I go drink half a bottle of Jameson at home, you have no idea what my behavior is because I'm behind closed doors and nobody sees me. If I go do that in the middle of Second Ave in Troy, well, you're probably going to be dealing with it. That's the problematic group that you're dealing with. And plus, they're also looking at the fact that we have only an illicit market. So they only see, you think about violence that pertains to the cannabis market. The cannabis market was one of the most violent markets that I saw as a cop. Yeah, there was a lot of violence around crack cocaine, but there was a ton of violence around cannabis. That's because it was a purely based on pure cash. And it really has been, for the most part, decriminalized in New York before it was legalized. Because the ramifications of getting arrested for cannabis, for the most part, were very small, even though you get arrested, go to jail, or go to prison, smaller amounts of cannabis. So it was a cash market. So of course, when there's a cash market, people are gonna be like, oh, that's a weed house. They'll grab some guns and go rob it. That's, we used to see a ton. So trying to convince like, well, that's not because of the drug. People aren't getting high on people aren't smoking weed and being like, I'm gonna go rob a place. That's the last thing they're doing. They are going like, hey, there's thousands of dollars of cash in there, and nobody's gonna call the police on me if I go kick the door in with a gun and steal their money because they're doing something illegal. So it's not the drug, it's the fact that we have prohibition that drives that. Just like organized crime came to this country because of prohibition against alcohol. So it's a matter of changing the mindset of like, okay, well, maybe the way we're doing business is helping drive many of the issues that we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Oh, as one of those freaky people who used to come through Albany on tour with Grateful Dead, I prefer this.
I always
night.
enjoyed that, by the way. So.
We did too, but I enjoyed this dynamic much better than the dialogues back then. But one of the things I heard you say was the $47 billion price tag, annual price tag on criminal enforcement. And when we look at the DEA's budget is $2 billion plus, and there really is no incentive for them to decriminalize anything or to reform things. They're not interested in harm reduction based policies because justification for them is expanding the list of Schedule I controlled substances. How do we begin to unravel this, criminal industrial complex, and the force it has from a lobbying perspective?
So, I mean, my answer is, and it's not, this doesn't seem to ever change no matter what. We need elected officials who are going to actually change policy and say, no, this isn't how we're going to do things. And are willing to turn around and say, hey, maybe we need to change the policy of the fact that we listen to DEA gets the final say on what scheduling is. That doesn't make any sense. It's practice insanity. Do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. But at the end of the day, we elected a president who said he was going to do away with cannabis, was going to legalize cannabis on the federal level. We're what, 3 years into things, and he's said nothing. His administration has said nothing on cannabis, other than waiting for the DEA to come forward with what their recommendation is going to be, which everybody thinks it's going to be to go to Schedule 3. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we need to have political leaders that are willing to actually change policy, actually willing to take that step up. And we need it from both sides. It's not a Democrat or Republican. We need to educate those folks and say, here's what's happening. Yeah, listen, I stood in front of many tables with drugs and guns and money piled high after a big, huge bust, with a board behind me with 40 people that just got arrested. And I used to say to my narcotics guys, I'd be like, okay, how quiet are the streets going to be? They would look, I don't have a watch on, but they look down, they'd be like, yeah, the next shipment's on its way. And I'd be like, what did we just do all this for? And that was nothing against them. They were doing what they were charged to do. It was like, what did we just do all this for? We just spent all this money on a huge wire case, took a bunch of people down. We have all this piled up, and we're just going to do the same thing over and over again. Did we get anybody any help? Is anybody getting treatment?
We're going to go over the border and get all the cartels. There'll just be a new cartel as long as there's a market for it.
We would be better off paying off the cartel. We'd be better off saying to the cartels, how much money would it take to stop you from importing anything to us? That shouldn't be.
So Pammy, did you have a question?
Oh, sorry, I think I scratched my head.
Oh, okay. Does anyone else online have any questions at all? Still? Okay, great. It's very quiet today.
one kind of follow-up on that question, though. Do you think when you look at, we've seen progress made though with like Oregon, although Oregon's decriminalization is kind of being attacked, but kind of also wasn't kind of launched with equal access to treatment also and support services. But in Colorado, we've seen legalization. What do you think as a state strategy and existing in this strange cognitive dissonant, federally illegal, state legal as a strategy to kind of change?
So I think that I think as far as psychedelics go, I think the Colorado strategy is a good one. Really, really good job of getting political leaders, getting law enforcement leaders, kind of the same thing like we said when John McDonald was here looking at our restaurant. The chief in Denver stood up and was like, I have no interest in what psychedelics and officers. We got far more other things. So I do think that's a really good example of the state that did things right. But then there is that carryover of what are we going to do at the federal level that changes, because my personal interest in that is that, like, yeah, I want the community to have access, but like, my cops still can't get access to cannabis because of the federal government. So if I can't get them access to psychedelics and that treatment, I'm still spinning around not taking care of that.
Because the cash economy still exists even in the legal cannabis market because there's no banking allowed.
Yeah.
And that's really one of the huge issues with this current state of things.
Right.
It's horrible.
It's a huge issue.
Right.
Yeah, I mean the safety when medical cannabis got legalized here, when the first dispensary was opening in Albany, that was like a big concern because it was all the safety and security. It's like, well, if we actually had the ability to not worry about them, to run like a regular business,
right,
I won't be worried about people showing up with cash. That's an issue. Yeah, you're right. Everything falls off.
Yeah.
And that access to banking and a pure cash economy is going to parallel right into psychedelics also. Their remaining
absolutely.
schedule.
All right. So do we do the state first, or do we abandon our state efforts and just jump?
No, I think you got to do the state first. I wish it would be, we could get the federal government to change. I don't know.
The
if
greater
Congress
the
is ever gonna
preponderance
agree
of
on
states that do this, I think the harder it is for the federal government to
Well,
stamp their feet.
there was just a hospice doctor that sued the DEA, and the Seventh Circuit Board of Appeals took the case. So, and that could be an avenue towards change too, going through the court systems. And be like, hey, the DEA really should not have a say when the National Health Administration, the FDA, all of these other federal departments have said, yes, go ahead and use this. But the DEA is an enforcement agency. Why do they have a say in what people can and can't do? That's their, Brendan, thank you so much. Yeah.
And thank you for being so. Listen to people like you. That's why.
Yeah, absolutely.
Only I get my kids to listen.
That's the struggle. So I know we already are after 8, right? Wow, just after 8. Oh wow. Just a couple of the old business things. The email to legislators. So speaking of ways to get involved, we are close to finalizing the email that I just want to have that as a page on our website. So these are the things that I've been thinking about. I was like, oh right, we have this website. Let's put some resources there for people to have access. Has it been re-edited? No.
Well, I haven't.
Okay. Yeah. And that also we could put the talking points that we've been talking about up on the website. And really exciting, just a couple hours ago, I found the footage from
the Rosendale Film Festival. So we, Aaron Ganuth, Allison Hoots, Bill Brennan, Dee Dee Goldpaw, and I did a panel last year at the Rosendale Film Festival on psychedelics from a religious, a legal, a therapeutic, and a research perspective. And I couldn't find what I did with the file. But I was looking for something else and I found it. So I'm gonna try to upload it. It's about almost an hour and a half, but I'm gonna see if I can upload it to YouTube. So that will also be online, and it does need to be edited, maybe. I don't know if it can be, but I watched a lot of it and you can hear it, it's great. It could be better, but still great. Let's see, what were the other things? That was that, and then we already talked about that. And then, yeah, next meeting is going to be March 12th, so Tuesday, March 12th, and hopefully we can get a veteran is what we're shooting for. So if anyone has any ideas, a veteran that has benefited from psychedelic medicine or is working in the this world, we would love to be able to give them this platform to interact with. Does anyone have any other final questions, comments, concerns? No? Well, then thank you all so much for joining us. And February 26th, Monday, if you can make it, definitely be there. It's going to be a great evening. And then the 27th, and if you are interested in occupying a table, I think we are nearing that 12 table limit, but we do want as many people as possible to try to interact with the lawmakers during that day. So even if you're not coming as I'm representing this group, we want bodies in the room so that the lawmakers can see how many people are interested in this issue. Because the one of the most frequent responses we got last year was, oh, I haven't heard from my constituents about this issue. Now, the Albany Capital Region area, all of our lawmakers, even Phil Steck said he would vote for the bill if it got called to vote. But we're pretty locked down here. So it's, folks, if you're joining from afar, contact your lawmakers, tell them why this is important. Tell your friends to contact the lawmakers, because that is actually how in New York we make change, because we can't propose a citizen referendum. The lawmakers have to act on something. So we need to tell them to do it. All right. With that being said, thank you all for joining. Have a good day.